there have been some administrative blunders with the way that this tournament's been put on. We've talked about a lot of them in terms of scheduling, in terms of times that games have been put on, and in terms of the absurd amount of travel and bouncing around that teams and supporters have had to do. The supporters haven't done it. They haven't travelled. We haven't had much travelling support at most of the games. And the teams have had far too onerous a set of requirements put on them just to try to be at their games. Afghanistan are playing the very last game of the pool stage, and then they're playing the first semi-final. They've got barely 2 nights, and that's the reason you were discussing at the start of the game why they couldn't have played that semi as a day game. They couldn't have, because it would have been 30 hours between matches for Afghanistan. Not that they knew that Afghanistan were going to play that last pool stage, but that those positions in the group were always destined to play that last pool stage, and if either of those teams were to make a semi-final, they would have been then playing that one 30 hours later. So it just wasn't viable to do that. They had to at least sort of push them out to 40-something hours. But it's just too much. Every team has had this thing of playing one day, travelling the next, playing the next in another country. It doesn't make any sense to me that you would spread things out that far and wide instead of trying to find a more efficient way to do it with more games in one place across a run.
I would have thought the way to do it for the finals would be have your 2 semis and your final in the same place.
100%. And if you actually want people to come to it, for instance, in Barbados, if you want to get a contingent of English supporters to come in from Britain and supporters to come in from the United States, a great thing to sell them would be 2 semis and a final, so 3 games in the space of 5 days. For instance, you have a day there as a reserve if you need it, and you've got 3 high-quality games of cricket you can come to in less than a week. You can fly out for your week package tour or whatever it is. You can go to all 3 of those games, and then you've got yourself a crowd that's not dependent on who's made which match, because if you're in town, you'll go to a semi-final 2 days running. If you've come out to watch the cricket, why wouldn't you go and watch the other semi-final? It just seems so much more sensible, and then there wouldn't have been all of these issues with trying to get teams into town and trying to get media coverage into the town where, most of the media covering England aren't able to actually be at the match. They're mostly in Barbados.
Indeed, and on the WhatsApp 0330 123 1826 if you want to get involved. That is 0330 123 1826. Richard in Leeds says, is it just me, or have the attendance has been surprisingly low for the World Cup so far? A surprising number of seats in the stadium are free, even though this is a semi-final involving India. And I can tell you why they are,
It's not
Richard.
surprising.
It isn't surprising, because actually chatting to fans across the Caribbean who are trying to be getting as much cricket as they possibly can, the cost of getting firstly to the region is expensive. I chatted to a supporter a doctor from New York who was over in St. Lucia, and he said he'd paid $3,000 to get to the games that were taking place in St. Lucia, and he literally tried everything to get to the semi-final in Guyana. There was no travel. He just couldn't do it. There was no flights that would work. It was too expensive. If there was anything, it involved going via Miami and back and forth. Teams are on charters, we know that. And that's how they're getting about. Some amazing commitment from supporters who have made it to this semi-final from both England and India. But it's not full. It's not remotely full. And
they'll struggle to get back to Barbados for the final if either team qualifies, and that's been the tricky part, hasn't it? And I think what we'll find tomorrow is the final. Yes, it's the World Cup final, but we'll have a big crowd, and we'll actually have people from all 4 teams that have gone, right, let's just gamble and go to Barbados, because we know we can get there now. If we go to the semi and England qualify, we might not be able to get to Barbados.
It definitely won't be able to. There is no way to get from this game to Barbados at the moment. There are no commercial flights available. But if you're talking about attendances and why they've been low in a lot of the games, well, look at a couple of factors. They haven't been low at the India games in New York. They were full, and the West Indies games in the Caribbean, they were full. Those are the only games that I've been to where I've seen big crowds. There was one Bangladesh game in New York that was well attended. That is not surprising when you've got games either starting at 10:30 in the morning, often on weekdays, or you've got games starting at 8:30 at night that don't finish until 1 o'clock in the morning. How are you supposed to take your kids to a game if you want to take them along to a T20 match if you're not getting out of the stadium until 12:30 or 1 a.m., let alone some of the park and ride situations where it was taking people an hour or 2 hours to get clear from the ground back to somewhere where they could then even start to travel back to a hotel. We had people getting home from games in St. Lucia at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's absurd that people have been put in these positions, and of course they're not going to games. And if you're a local, why would you be rocking up at 10 o'clock in the morning to try to go to a game? If you're in New York, why would you be waking up at 7 a.m. to get out to the depths of Long Island, a trip that's going to take you 2 hours if you're living in Queens or Manhattan or somewhere like that to try to get to a game? And even the pricing, you could at least rock up to a game in St Lucia and buy a ticket on the gate, which you couldn't do in the US. But the pricing of some of these games, $45, $50 for a ticket to go in and watch two neutral teams at 10 a.m. Why is that appealing? You know, that's a lot of money in parts of the world where wages aren't particularly high, where people don't have a huge amount of disposable income. And so it's fine for an English tourist to fly in with a higher disposable income to be able to splash on tickets, but that's not something that somebody living in these places is necessarily as able to do.
There was one way we were talking to our catamaran sailor the other day and said, how much to get us to Guyana and back? And he said 50 grand.
Well, there you go. Well, what a lack of commitment from those that haven't done that, then, eh? But what frustrates me is when the atmospheres have been great, and there have been plenty of them, as you say, particularly in the Caribbean involving West Indies. Amazing nights in St Lucia at the Darren Sammy Cricket Ground with stadium absolutely chock-a-block, noise like I've never heard at a cricket venue, bouncing around the corrugated iron roofing and all of that sort of thing that makes an event an event. And people will be turning on their televisions across the UK this weekend to watch Glastonbury Festival. Part of what they're watching is the bands on stage. Part of what they're watching is the crowds enjoying it.
Absolutely.
Because there is something compelling as a human being seeing crowds into the event that you are watching on your television and hearing. It's why that World Cup that took place in 2021 always feels like it has an asterisk, the one that took place in the UAE, because there was no crowds in, and it always felt like it was an exhibition. And a sporting event, a cultural event, needs people at the venue as well as eyes watching the screens to be significant. You have to sense it matters to those that are watching on live.
And there has always been, well, there's been this shift, in the last, I suppose, 20 years, most dramatically. Maybe we're looking at 30 plus years, really, in terms of cricket becoming a television show rather than a sporting spectacle, and the importance of the crowd diminishing as the importance of the TV screen increases. But if you're a broadcaster and you want to be selling these games to an audience, one thing that you need is to have that crowd as well. You have to, that's what captures an audience. That's what captures an audience at home, is captured by the fact that the crowd at the ground is responding to it. And that's why it's been quite a sad thing for the last 20, 30 years, seeing test matches played in front of empty grounds, seeing low crowds coming in, because people watching at home feel flat about it. They don't feel the same excitement about the games that they're watching. So the scheduling here has been, in my opinion, put on with no consideration for the actual crowd at the venue, because it's all about the crowd on television. But not considering the crowd at the venue diminishes the experience for the spectator on television as well. So it's a very self-defeating system, and I think that it only undermines the value of TV rights to not look after the audience at the ground.
And this is the eternal battle and the struggle of not just cricket, it's sport around the world, and ensuring that you get the maximum impact from the value of your television rights is vital, because that is where the vast source of income comes from, the proportion of income comes from, and you're not going to get that, relatively speaking, from getting 10,000 inside a venue to watch a game. It is peanuts compared to what you get for selling the television rights. But ultimately, as you say, you are undermining the product as a spectacle. It looks worse.
It looks worse. It sounds worse. It doesn't grab people in the same way, because people, as with some of the correspondence we're getting, turn this on and say, well, that seems a bit sad. That seems a bit flat. Why are we watching this? And the precedent that we've had set by the ICC statement that you were reading out before, saying, well, this game has to be on at this time because that will allow the most people in the world who want to watch cricket to watch the game. Well, does that mean that next time there's a T20 World Cup final happening at the MCG, does that mean it needs to be played at midnight Australian East Coast time, because that will be 7 p.m. in India, and that will let the most people watch the game on television? That's the precedent that's being set by the kind of statements that we're getting about why this scheduling has been set up the way it has, not taking account of where it is in the world, but taking account of where it's being beamed to.
Saying that, the games that I've covered in this World Cup, in New York, Florida, and here in Barbados, the crowds have been great.
Because they're easy to get to.
The crowds have been great.
Relatively, they are easy to get to. In Barbados, there are flights every single day flying in from all parts of Canada and the United States, eastern seaboard, and so it is not a difficult journey, and certainly those big metropolitan areas across the east coast of the US.
Florida was the hardest place to get to because we had to get the train at 4 a.m.
Well, indeed. And so, sometimes these things can be slightly more complicated. But
some of the New York games were completely empty, just about. The Ireland-Canada game, for instance, the Sri Lanka-South Africa game.
But those crowds still surprised me. I still thought they were decent.
Yeah.
7,000 in. I was like, well, it's actually pretty good for, a neutral game where who wants to buy a ticket for that?
That's difficult to get to, and every other barrier. But it does feel like there have been barriers put in people's way to attend games, and it's all been in consideration for television.
I think as a tournament there have been some brilliant moments, but I also think so often in competitions what you want to see is amazing moments with the entire event around the ground feeling like an amazing event. And there have been a couple of times when it has felt like that. And don't get me wrong, often games involving India. And there have been some brilliant crowds that have come in for matches, as they tend to be with India play. But there have been nights when West Indies have been at home, or when the England support's been good, or when fans have been able to make it in to follow their team. And it's felt huge and brilliant and thrilling and exciting.
There's been fire starters at the games and everything. It's been unreal. I've loved it, absolutely loved it. And I actually think getting cricket in the US was so important, or is so important. And the crowds out there, they really showed that, didn't they? People, I had someone come up to us in a place called Elbow Room and said, I can't believe you guys are all here for cricket. And I was trying to explain cricket to him, and he said, how's cricket work? I said, right, there's a base at one side and a base at the other.
Yeah,
I said,
start with that.
And I really made it like baseball and simplified it. And I was like, but it's better than baseball because something happens every ball. And he was like, okay, I'm going to watch the cricket tomorrow. I was like, yes, that's one more US fan. I've got one. I went around basically being like, everybody needs to come and watch the cricket. I've been to watch baseball twice. It was boring. I was there for 3.5 hours. Not one run was scored.
Yep.
But what they do at baseball, which is incredible, is the event itself, the crowd engagement, getting everybody involved. And I was like, if in the US they could do that in cricket will take off.
Yeah, and when it annoys me when people talk about T20, high-scoring T20, it's just like baseball. It can be less like baseball.
No.
You only get about, on average, one home run a game.
Totally, yeah. A 2-1 result is an exciting baseball game. And look, I've tried with baseball. I sit there and watch test matches, and I thought, okay, I've got the patience for this. But yeah, I think it's the way that a lot of things can happen in an innings, and then somebody's out and it's all for nothing. You've had this, you've had a walk to first, and then someone's hit a double, and they've got a couple of players on base, and then it builds up to, and then the third one's out, and that's it. You just wipe it all off and start again.
So it's much like the sort of incredibly exciting build-up with all this high-quality talent coming together, all set up perfectly, and it all falls away.
Yes.
You've been following England's men in the football Euros?
I can't say I have.
Similar sort of vibe? Right, okay. Sport could do that to us sometimes, and it can be frustrating, but I think from lovers of the game, not just because of the romance of what happens on the field, Jeff, but because of the overall cultural event and the amazing diversity of venue and experience that you're lucky enough to see if you do get to see the game around the world. It feels like every time that there is a game that doesn't have the best chances possible to get as many people through the gates, it feels like a missed opportunity.
I'll tell you what, it's the games that we went to at St Lucia, the 2 West Indies games that we did there were by far and away the highlight. I mean, the Australia-India game was a great match on the field, but the 2 West Indies games were the ones that felt like something was happening, like there was something significant, and being able to get out of the commentary box and get up on the hill and get amongst people and chat to people and try to dodge the bottles of rum being passed around, halfway through an innings, and feel like we were part of something bigger than just sitting there yakking about whatever was happening on the field. The field was there, but it felt to me as though, and I'm very confident in this, that you could be someone who'd never seen a cricket match before in your life, and if your friends took you to the hill at the Darren Sammy Cricket Ground in St Lucia to watch West Indies play, you would have had a great night regardless. You would have been part of an event, part of an experience. If somebody's taking you to a mostly empty, quiet, fairly desolate cricket ground to sit there and focus on whatever's happening in the middle and nothing but, because there's nothing else to help keep your attention. That only works if you're already interested in cricket. And I'm one of those people, and you're one of those people, and you, Alex, are one of those people. We could sit there and watch a game by ourselves with not a problem in the world because we like doing that. But it's taken us a while to build up to that. You have to get sufficiently immersed in the game to be able to be captured by its rhythms without the context meaning anything. The context does mean something to the more casual supporter, and so why would you want to go to a game that doesn't feel fun and doesn't feel like it has life and character and something else, some interaction between what's happening in the middle and what's happening in the stands, and that's what I think we're missing, is that it's like a respiratory situation. It's like a lung that inflates and deflates. Energy goes from the crowd to the middle and from the middle to the crowd, and it keeps shifting back from one to the other. They feed each other, and that's the magic of the spectacle, the magic of live sport.
But Alex, given the finances of how sport works, it's not going to change.
No, it won't change. If anything, it'll go the other way, won't it? If anything, more money coming from TV.
But sport will kill itself if it does that.
TV's going to be in charge.
If it's only TV and it never accounts for the crowd, it'll lose the thing that actually makes people want to watch.
But you think of like the football crowds in England, the cricket crowds in England. It's all on TV. Sell it for millions of pounds. People still go. So I actually think you have to try and get the interest of the locals to get to the games as well. So I think, especially with certain sports, cricket in certain countries, it's not as straightforward as, okay, it's on the telly, well, let's all watch it. I actually think it's on the telly in England all the time, but we sell out grounds day after day after day.
The fact that it's on television isn't why there isn't a crowd in the ground, but the fact that this tournament has been tailored for television is what has made it a lot harder for people to actually go to the games, because of the timing of the games, and because of the shifting around through the region, and also the ticket pricing. I just genuinely don't understand why you wouldn't price tickets as low as you possibly can to try to get as many people in, and whatever supposed revenue you might be foregoing because you're selling cheaper tickets should probably be made up by the fact that you're selling more of them. It's pretty basic economics, I would have thought.
Jeremy Wimbush emails on exactly this thing, really. He says, interesting discussion on the T20 World Cup ticket prices and crowds. I wonder if cricket has reached the point where crowds attending matches are effectively extras in television productions, but pay heavily for the privilege to attend. If so, perhaps they should be paid rather than charge exorbitant ticket prices. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, that is part of what we're talking about. If the crowd is adding to the spectacle, then I don't see why they should be being charged through the nose just because they could. The fact that there were $10,000 tickets for India-Pakistan, and this wasn't resale, this wasn't somebody scalping, this was official ICC pricing for the, I can't remember what NAF name it had, it might have been the Diamond Club or something. It sounded very sort of cheesy, frequent flyer points kind of situation. You pay us 10 grand and you can sit at a little high table on a high stool and someone will bring you some tiny cheeseburgers while you watch the game and you can feel very important. I mean, that's ludicrous that is something that's even considered, because it's not helping the sport. It's all about ego and prestige, and it's all about trying to cash in as hard as possible on that one India-Pakistan game, that one golden ticket. And it's like, maybe to some extent you could say, oh, okay, go for it on that basis with that one game. But if you want to get people down to this game, it needs to be a $5 ticket, not a $50 ticket. It needs to have buses set up that can bring people to the ground. It needs to make it as easy as possible for people to go, not as complicated as possible.
Well, that game, though, you're always going to sell it out, so why not make the most? And you could argue that if you make that money, that means that more in the coffers to provide to grow the game elsewhere and one thing and another. In some ways, I've got less issue with a game that is always going to sell out anyway, because, look, yes, you could argue that it limits the scope of people that could afford to go to it, and that is a separate discussion, perhaps. Something I wouldn't be comfortable. Certainly, I think you can look at the price of Test match tickets in the UK and say at times that they're too high because it stops certain groups to be able to go. And
they're offensively high,
and that is another discussion.
I wouldn't pay to go.
You wouldn't?
No.
And it's again.
No. And I love cricket. I would just watch it on the TV.
Yeah, and that's another discussion for another day. I think the issue here is if you've got empty stadiums, and people aren't getting in,
then why are you still insisting on trying to price tickets at 60, 80, whatever, US dollars? It just, none of it makes any sense to me.
It's frustrating, and it is, as you say, Jeff, the sort of experience going to St Lucia and those nights watching West Indies, you'll never forget them.
And we're talking about the ticket pricing. We're not even taking into consideration travel. Like, that's not even come into discussion. So you're paying $100 for your ticket to go watch India, England in a semi-final, but you've got a $4,000 flight to add to that and a hotel to add on top of that as well. So it's not easy.
Yeah. Diana emails, listening to your chat about venues and crowds, I'd like to congratulate the ECB about their pricing of tickets for the women's games and the 100 competition. It's meant I can take my 3 children to many games. The grounds aren't always full these days. But it's amazing. It's so important that sport's accessible for families.
And what we have seen is Worcester's sold out for the women's game, their next ODI against New Zealand.
Because it makes it a better event and it looks better. This is the point. If you turn on the television and you see empty stands, you think, well, if the people that are nearby can't be bothered to go, why should I be bothered to tune in? I might as well watch something that looks like people care about. And even if you're not consciously thinking, even if it's, I don't know, a conscious thing, it just affects how you enjoy something.
Yeah, would you go and watch an episode of the Great British Bake Off if it was 210 quid to get in? You probably wouldn't. You'd probably stay home and watch it on the telly. So, and the other part of that is that going to a game with crowds, if you go to that sold-out women's match, for instance, this summer, and you've got an 8-year-old girl going to that match and going to her first cricket match, and it's sold out and there's an atmosphere and it's exciting, that's the sort of thing that makes that person somebody who's going to buy the TV subscription in 20 years' time, or continue to do that for the rest of their lives. That's the sort of thing that gets people in as fans of the sport and keeps them as fans of the sport, because they have those formative experiences, which going to a dead and empty ground is not necessarily going to have.
You're making such an investment in the future by doing that, because all of us...
That's what the 100 does so well.
Yeah, it is, and the 100 will have critics for all sorts of reasons and for many legitimate reasons as well. But one thing that you and that's part, it's always going to be one of those things that there's huge disagreements about. But what I would say is unquestionable is that you turn up at matches and there is a different demographic and a more varied demographic of people attending the matches than you would otherwise see, and that makes it a different experience that will grow the game. And if you can get, from a visual point of view, somebody turns on the telly and think, blimey, that looks exciting, what are all those people in the crowd doing? Look at the noise, look at the variety of spectators from different parts of the world. It looks brilliant, and cricket has that fan base. It's got it. It's not like they have to fight for it. No, they've got it.
There are people who want to come to the games, but I think that pricing has been an issue for a long time. I think it's at its worst in England. That's from my experience travelling around the world, watching the game, that's where people really get stung the hardest, and where it sort of entrenches the elitism of that sport by making it as expensive as possible. There seems to be an idea that the idea of cricket seeing itself as a business rather than as a pastime or as a social good. That idea is that you have a moral obligation to make as much money as you possibly can. And then that's defended on the basis that you can then use that money to invest in other parts of the sport. There's no better investment than getting people to come to the game at a young age and get captured by the magic of the sport.
And this does happen around the world. I remember Charles Dagnall telling me about the games that took place prior to Christmas, again, between India's women and England's women in Mumbai, where they were giving tickets away for free. But the grounds were packed, and it was incredible. It made the event just so much better. And those people come back in 10, 15, 20 years' time, and it is part of the process of growing the women's game, as we've seen. And over the years, ticket prices go up for things, and of course it's part of the inevitable evolution of how sport grows. But you do need people in the ground. I can't emphasise that enough, because if you turn on the television and see an empty venue, your heart sinks.
Well, it also just reflects badly on the sport. It reflects badly on it as a product. You turn it on and you think, well, this must suck because nobody wanted to come. This must be dull. This must be uninteresting. Why is that going to make a casual observer flicking across the channels think, I might stick around and see what happens here, as opposed to seeing a packed crowd?
Ian in York emails says, you refer to games looking better with good crowds. Well, on that basis, the T20 World Cup shouldn't return to the West Indies because there's nobody there, e.g. for this semi-final. But the point is, Ian, it is a work day in Guyana, and
it's not about the region, it's about the organisation.
And it's coming up to 5 to 1 in the afternoon, and frankly, most people can't afford to and I'm not sure if it necessarily in any part of the world on a work day, on a weekday, when you perhaps have got kids at school so they can't come along, you've got to take a day's leave to go, you're booking in advance, all of these things, it's not that straightforward.
Well, pop South Africa and Afghanistan on at the Oval at 10 a.m. on a Wednesday, and look, you get some Surrey members or whatever coming down and using their cards to get in, but I don't think you're going to be selling it out. Remember that Women's World Cup final that we talk about in 2017 at Lord's, which the available tickets were packed out, but the pavilion was empty. None of the members bothered to show up. There are always sections of a society who will not be interested or will not want to come to certain games, but this is setting it up in the worst possible way. If this game is on at 6:30 p.m. or 7 p.m. and the tickets are $5 or $10, you've got a reasonable chance of trying to at least mostly fill this ground. If people have to be there at 9:30 in the morning to go through security checks in order to pay an exorbitant price to watch two teams that they have no investment in, why are they going to show up?
So emails keep on coming in, and John Traynor says Lancashire announced today at the opening day of the county championship fixture against Nottinghamshire on Sunday at Southport and Birkdale Cricket Club. Sold out. Championship match sold out. That's brilliant, and that is brilliant. Fabulous day. Any time a cricket event, sporting event is sold out. It's great. It's great news, and because it's better for it.
And it's one of the conversations that's gone on and on for years now within England, is scheduling of county cricket and how much of it is over weekends at the height of the summer when people are on holiday, or they're more likely to be on holiday, they're more likely to be able to attend, as opposed to having sort of midweek fixtures and jamming them in at the fringes of the season in April and May at one end, and September and occasionally October at the other end. So they're endless conversations that keep looping around about these things, but it does seem frustrating that the voice of the person in the stands so often seems to be unheard by the people in the boardrooms.
And I'm going to keep on making this point, but it is an important one, and that is that it is not just impacting the people that are standing in the crowds and enjoying it, it impacts the person that's watching on television. Because if you turn on Glastonbury this weekend and you saw the headline act, saw Shania Twain on Sunday afternoon. I mean, for me, why you wouldn't always turn on for Shania Twain?
Well, yeah, exactly.
It would be a mystery. But if you were to turn that on and saw there was 500 people in front of a vast stage and the field was otherwise empty, you think, well, this looks rubbish. Why would I bother watching on television? It just, subliminally or not, impacts how you enjoy it.
People like to be part of something that other people are doing. And that's for good or for ill. There's that kind of energy that captures people, but there's a reason that there's not a vast audience all tuning in simultaneously to watch a band playing in a studio to nobody. They're turning on to watch them playing at an event because it feels like an event, and there's something very innate, very instinctive really in that need to feel a sense of belonging within a group, to feel like you're part of something from a social group much bigger than you. And it's exciting. It sends a rush through your body. It gives you an adrenaline kick. It gives you something almost indefinable that makes you feel kind of amazing to be part of a group of people where there's a surge of energy going in one particular direction. So that's what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about when a close game comes down to the finish. That's what we're talking about when we remember things like the end of the 2019 World Cup final.
Imagine if that game had been played in front of no crowd.
In front of 2,000 people.
Imagine it.
Because it was scheduled at 8 in the morning or something.
I mean, it still would have been full, that game. But, I don't know. But anyway.
I think we've said our piece.
We've said our piece.
On that.
Adrian in Cheltenham, you've talked about and around the problems with the T20 World Cup, but why was the scheduling debacle, prices hiked and all the pitches allowed to be authorised, and by whom? Well, that's a different question. What we will try and do, actually, and this goes without saying, is we'll try and speak to someone from the upper reaches of the ICC, and Jeff Allardyce is normally very good about coming forward and offering his thoughts, and the ICC, absolutely are always welcome to come and join our conversations, because I think that there are plenty of legitimate questions around all of this.
And there's only so much that an ICC official can say, and I make this point on other shows quite often, but the ICC is not an independent organisation making these decisions. It's a member body. It's comprised of its 12 full member boards for the most part, and then a very minor voice for the associates and the other 100+ teams that make up world cricket. And a representative from each of those boards sits around a board table and they vote on what they want to happen. So none of this is being handed top down from the ICC in inverted commas. These are the decisions being made by the member boards, and particularly by the most influential and wealthiest member boards, and we all know which ones they are.